Well, I first just want to salute you and your leadership. Give Brother Tavis a hand. Give Brother Tavis a hand. Very important. I was blessed to go to 18 cities and 11 states in 7 days with Brother Tavis on the poverty tour that he came up with and his team facilitated. And we were able to see the middle class brothers and sisters of all colors, all cultures, all civilizations, and sexual orientations, because they were also immigrants with our brown brothers and sisters. They were black, they were brown, they were white. We started on the Indian reservation because it's always fascinating to look at America through the lens of the original peoples. It's a very important starting point. The original people. And we began with the notion that poor people are priceless and precious, just as each individual has a dignity that ought to be affirmed. And what did we see, Brother Tavis? We saw the results of a system in place that has been driven by corporate greed at the top, with oligarchs ruling and politicians rotating, with money coming from the big banks, big corporations, pushing working people to the margins and rendering poor people superfluous, which is to say either unnecessary or, in the great metaphor of Ralph Ellison, invisible. So anytime you talk about poor people, you got to talk about the larger systemic context. How could it be that the top 400 individuals have wealth equivalent to the bottom 150 million fellow citizens? There's something sick about that. And they say, oh, they deserve that they're so smart. No, I know some smart folk broke as the Ten Commandments financially. They just can't get a job. They just can't get a job. If 1% of the population owns 41% of the wealth, and yet, what is it now, 56% of our precious children of all colors live in or near poverty, the kind of thing Marian Wright Elder's been talking about? Something is deeply wrong. It's morally obscene. Then how could it be that poverty hasn't become the major moral and spiritual issue of our time? Because our leaders lack courage and independence. They're too tied to big money. How could it be that the prison-industrial complex has been expanding and $300 billion has gone into jails and prisons and the criminal justice system, and yet when it comes to money for schools, money for housing, money for jobs with a living wage, it's a warped system. We're here because Martin Luther King Jr. and others said America is a sick society. America doesn't always have to be sick if Americans rise up the way the Occupy movement has been talking about and begin to talk about these issues seriously. And that's why this issue of poverty, as it affects the middle class, is now declining. Because if it was just a matter of black, brown, and red, we'd be voices in the wilderness. Because as long as there's a black face or a brown face on poverty, we overlook it. I'm looking at Terry Reid and Bishop Staples and Dick Gregory right now. They know what I'm talking about. As long as there's a brown face, we overlook it. White middle class face, we got a problem now. We're going to have to deal with something. And that's fine, because we believe that white brothers and sisters have the same value as red and brown and black and yellow. And this moment, that's why I'm so excited about the manifesto that we wrote, brother. And we had a good time writing that thing. Oh, we did. We did. I hope you all noticed the tears in Sister Vicky's eyes at the very end of her presentation. And the tears have to do with somebody who cares. The tears have to do with recognizing the condition of poor people in America is a matter of national security, like Iraq, like Afghanistan, like whatever foreign policy that we know. And part of the problem in America is we don't have elected leaders who understand the tears.
Before you go further, I want to jump in right quick.
Yes.
When you say that poverty is an issue of national security.
National security.
Make the case for me.
Namely, that if we don't come to terms with it, then it's not the external threat, it's the internal rot that's going to lead toward a collapse of American democracy into an oligarchy, a plutocracy, where the well-to-do live in gated spaces and working people and poor people are at each other's throats, and America goes under as we know it. That's important. Am I right about your tears?
You're right.
And I feel that. And one of the reasons why we don't have the leadership among the 536 is that they are leading. They're just not leading in such a way that they make poor and working people a priority. When investment bankers are in trouble, they lead. They solve that problem. Here's big trillions of dollars. When the banking system's in problem, they lead. Action right away. When you need to go to war, action right away. How you going to pay for it? We'll deal with it down the line. Oh, you're not going to pay for it, huh? No. That certain kind of leadership is called myopic, short-sighted, narrow, and in the end, it leads toward catastrophe. What we need is courageous, progressive, prophetic leadership. And the truth is this, that historically in America, it's been primarily the black prophetic tradition that provided that leadership, precisely because you had a peoples enslaved, Jim Crowed, on intimate terms with terror, trauma, and stigma, but still taught the country how to love. Taught the country how to love. Justice is what love looks like in public. It has been the Frederick Douglasses and the Martin Kings and the Fannie Lou Hamers and the Ida B. Wells and the Dorothy Irene Height who taught us about justice, who taught us about love. And right now, the black prophetic tradition is very weak and feeble. Now, the black prophetic tradition has been the leaven in the American democratic loaf. And you don't have to be black to be part of that tradition. You have to be connected with that tradition and choose to be a part of it. Miles Horton chose, John Brown chose, Barbara Ehrenreich chooses. It's not a matter of stereotype. You're part of a tradition that has taught America the best about itself, of how to love others even when you're hated, to talk about justice even when revenge is coming at you. That is spiritual. That is moral. It's not just a political question. And we got 536 leaders in Washington that are so obsessed with power, 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 money, money, money. How they going to get the lobbyists satisfied? Where they going to get money for the next re-election? That when it comes to moral and spiritual issues like the condition of our precious children of all colors, it's an afterthought. And they talk about it during the election. And then as soon as they're elected, they back to business as usual. And we're going to go under. Even when we voted in 2008, even when we knew that the mean-spirited Republicans had pushed us to the brink of catastrophe, driven very much by corporate greed, we also knew that the system itself was broken. And just like when the black mayors took over cities that were in the process of breaking down, you get a black president in the White House in the process of a national system that is breaking down. And so we've got to keep our focus on the system, and we got to keep our focus on bodies, mind, hearts, and souls who have courage, vision, come together, organize, mobilize, because in the end, and this is where the legacy of Martin King becomes indispensable, that in the end it's not about one person or one president. It is about a fundamental transformation. We need a transfer of power from unaccountable oligarchs and plutocrats to those Sly Stone called everyday people. That's what we're talking about. And that means every color, every religion, every non-religion. We're talking about, are you concerned enough about the future that you're willing to take a risk, pay a cost, live, and maybe die? And that is the challenge, you see, because I'll tell you my first prayer when I think of Brother Barack Obama. You know what my first prayer is? I pray for the safety of his family, his precious two little ones, and wife. How come? Because white supremacy on the right wing of side is real. It's very real. And those of us who have lived under those kind of threats for 30 years know exactly what we're talking about. I'm looking again at Dick Gregory. Most of your friends are dead. How come they're dead? Because they love so much. They're willing to sacrifice. That's why Martin is gone. And most people don't want to die. They'd rather sell out than die. They'd rather sell out than die. But what we're talking about is not just one individual. We're talking about what kind of people we are. And if we don't have enough ordinary citizens of all colors to fight for your democracy here, just like you fight for it in Afghanistan under leadership formulations, then we're going to lose the democracy and poor people will still be caught. That's the challenge, it seems to me. That's a major challenge. That's the third moment in American history. Our first moment was against the British monarchy. People were willing to fight and they pushed out the imperialists. And the second was against slavery. They were willing to fight. They pushed out slavery, and Jim Crow was just another form of slavery, just like the new Jim Crow or prison industrial complex is just another form of slavery. And now the challenge in America is oligarchy. That's the challenge, and we have to have leadership that says we love oligarchs, we hate oligarchy. Because oligarchs are human beings who make choices and they can change their minds. Right. That's true. Just like white folk could choose to be white supremacists or they could fight white supremacy. You have to make a choice.
I want to ask, one second. I want to ask Barbara something specifically in follow-up to this, but let me, just 30 seconds, Doc.
Yes.
For those watching right now who see your passion and hear your argument, but would suggest that it's a bit hyperbolic, that is to say that you've overstated the case by suggesting that the future of our democracy is at stake, that sounds to some anti-American. It sounds like you don't believe in the notion of American exceptionalism. Are you overstating the case when you suggest that our democracy is at stake over the issue of power?
I would say you look at the present election, democracy almost gone anyway. Yeah. Big money's in the driver's seat. All you need to do is look at the super PACs. All you need to do is look at the Supreme Court that is complicitous to the corporate money flowing in. It's almost gone already. We've got to reinvigorate it. We've got to somehow renew it in that sense. But it's not hyperbolic in this sense, and I do agree with this.
There is just a thread.
Where I think the black prophetic tradition is very important, and here I want to engage my dear brother Roger, because you say I do believe in the Sankofa bird, which means you can't really move forward until you look back. And what you look back at are the great, courageous, loving, sacrificial people who shaped you, like your mother and father, my mother and father, and grandparents. And it goes on and on and on. And what the black prophetic tradition has taught America, that has been so obsessed with the future and the present, is that if you don't have a sense of history, and if you don't put yourself in a narrative that is rooted in something deeper than just money and fame and quick success and instant gratification, then the very capitalism that we're talking about has produced such hollow and shallow people that they're never going to straighten their backs up and take a stand against anything because they're up for sale. That's what the system's all about. So that in that sense, and I mean, you tell me whether you agree or disagree, history still becomes very important.
The younger you are in America, the more likely you are to be in poverty. The Indiana University white paper underscores that as well. Susie talked about the difficulty that students have to navigate, but what do we say in this present moment in America about and to a nation that allows that statistic to be the reality?
Well, one, it's a major indictment, because it means that the weakest, the most vulnerable, and we know how precious they are more likely to be in the worst social condition. What kind of people are we really when we examine ourselves and acknowledge that reality? That's not just sad. That's pathological. It really is. It really is. Oh, that's anti-American. No, I'm anti-injustice in America. That's not the same thing. I'm anti-injustice anywhere, but in America too. And that's unjust. But then the question becomes, if we're really serious about being poverty abolitionists and calling for the eradication and abolition of poverty, we've got to target the young people, especially from birth to 5 years old. All the evidence talks about the shaping of their minds and hearts and souls, you see. And it's not just a matter of programs, it's also a matter of in civic societies. What kind of discourse does this kind of discourse take place in churches, mosques, synagogues, civic institutions? No. Other priorities at work. What's going on? The renaissance of compassion and the nonviolent democratic revolution that we're calling for against oligarchy has to take place across the board in every sphere of our society. That's part of the consciousness raising that needs to take place. Beginning with the baby. You know, we moved from a stage of monopoly industrial capitalism to monopoly finance capitalism, so that 40 years ago, the banks only had 9 or 10% of the corporate profits in the whole economy. Today they have 43% of the corporate profits. And when you have banks that are not primarily interested in lending anymore, but rather trading on casino-like operations in which they make big money, but they don't produce any product. They're making billions of dollars. When the General Motors were making big money, they were producing product and they were providing jobs. Nowadays, it's speculative. That's what finance capitalism is globally. And we have to be honest about that and then say we've got to be practical in terms of how we're going to be able to preserve our dignity, integrity, organizing, mobilizing programs that help people. But you have to also tell people the very, very painful truth of the kind of system that we are living in. And unfortunately, it's very rare that they even get a chance to hear these kinds of truths about the kind of capitalism. People debating about Bain. Bain is the peak of an iceberg. Predatory capitalism has been at work for the last 30 years across the board in significant ways. Bain is not some isolated unit tied to private equity. This thing has been happening across the board. That's why trade unions pushed against their backs pushed against the wall. And so in that sense, it does look rather bleak at times, but this is another reason why the black prophetic tradition is important. If you've been under slavery for 244 years, it looks kind of bleak. But here comes Harriet Tubman anyway. Here come the spirituals anyway. If you've been Jim Crow for over 100 years in the land of liberty, it looks bleak. But here come the blues and John Coltrane and Sarah Vaughan and Martin King and A. Philip Randolph to say, you know what? We're going to teach you how to love and struggle for justice with your head high in the midst of darkness. That's what we're talking about. And that's how difficult it is. Under slavery, it was a crime for black people to love. You love your child, but they're selling your child Virginia and you in Georgia, you go crazy or you get some spiritual fortitude. It was also a crime to hope. We couldn't worship God without white supervision, so you stole away at night in the creek and you held hands in a ring shout and you raised your voice and you lift your voice and sang a spiritual. That was a crime in the land of religious liberty. So that no matter how dark it is, even in the present, it's hard to conceive of what my great-great-great-grandmother and great-great-great-grandfather had to wrestle with in the abyss of American slavery. I can't conceive of it even being worse, as bad as it is, but with this proviso. And this is where I want to say zero on young folk, because I spend a lot of time with young people. I learn a lot from young people. I see the Cornel West theory right here, one of the grand hip-hop group here in Washington, D.C. and around the country. And they're kind enough to name it after me and get in trouble, but I appreciate that. But I say this about young folk in a critical way, that I do not know of a wave of young people who are commensurate to the grandmothers and grandfathers and those ancestors that shaped me in terms of who I am. I just don't. And the reason is because young people have been so penetrated with a capitalist culture and the culture of superficial spectacle and instant gratification and overnight success and push button getting over. So in that sense, there's a shift from the John Coltrane's and the Sarah Vaughns and the Curtis Mayfields and the Ray Charles and the Aretha Franklins into the bubblegum music that's too dominant. There's a shift. Now, we got a number of prophetic folk, but that is a shift. So when we talk about the young people who are to help make this fundamental social change, if you're not talking about courage, integrity, willingness to serve and sacrifice, then you're going to get bought out. You're going to sell out quick. You're not going to be a long-distance runner. You're going to be so obsessed with instant success and superficial status that you're going to make your grandmama weak from the grave. Because she wanted you to have earned greatness, not quick success. She wanted to measure it by the love in your heart and the service that you rendered, not what your position is and how big your crib is. That's a very different sensibility. And that's the tradition we got to keep. We got to fight for that. We got to keep it alive. And, of course, it's at work and what Brother Rogers talking about.
Dr. West.
No, just quickly. Make poverty a priority in the national house and make it a priority in the world house. So that Latin America, Asia, Africa, every corner of the globe, poor people's humanity is accented in their capacities, abilities are accented in such a way that you can see their self-development and their self-realization. Their voices are heard at the highest level. But it means what? Righteous indignation, anger, channeled through love and justice, not bigotry and revenge, but they'll never be changed given oligarchic rule if you don't get mad with love and courage and be willing to live and die for something bigger than you.
Please thank Cornel West.